This week, we saw MrBeast join Steven Bartlett on Steven Bartlett's podcast, The Diary of a CEO, and it does seem as if that MrBeast is going on a little bit of a podcast media tour, along with all the other things, of course, that he's doing, and I wanted to break it down and sort of share what we learnt as this was breaking this morning, and I had the opportunity to do so. Steven Bartlett opens the podcast by sharing, firstly, the fact that he believes that Jimmy is truly unique. After being asked why, Jimmy shares that, quote, "When I was 11, I just said I was going to be a YouTuber or die trying. Even if, quote, no one still watches my videos on this day, I'm still going to," end quote. Everyone who has I've watched personally be successful has shared a level of conviction and focus that Jimmy has clearly shown. However, being everyone who I've personally watched and personally you would think of when you think of success specifically, everyone who I've watched technically be successful in anything specifically, so your Jeff Bezos, his Steve Jobs, etc., anyone with any level of success has shared the same level of conviction and focus that Jimmy clearly has and continues to move forward and his own move forward with. But it has, and we kind of had hinted at the beginning episode or the beginning introduction to hook the viewer into this podcast, that his mental health potentially is suffering or could suffer because of the fact of how much he's doing and how much he's going to be moving forward. And especially as well-known people in Hollywood, there is this culture of creating that challenge to constantly strive forward with potentially drugs. Now, not in Jimmy's case, but has had a knock-on effect to Jimmy's mental health, as we alluded to and we get into a little bit later. Personally, I can say when I've had a dream to understanding what I wanted to build in regards to Bunter Media to be the biggest business of all time, it was a lovely idea until I had an office and started having staff bills to pay every month, and I didn't necessarily have the money to pay for it, living a life in stress the whole time. And personally, I found it wouldn't be good for me, and of course we live and learn, but I've personally found it very interesting over the last couple of years as my personal goals for the business have changed and adapted. Anyway, going back to the podcast, Jimmy claims that he is one of the most competitive and stubborn people that he's ever met, and he's never going to give up. He also shared that when you were making a lot of money, people think that working a lot or being solo focused on what you're building is a great thing, and that's of course what it takes. However, on the other side of things, when you're not making this huge money, people just think that you're ludicrous and they see you as specifically unhealthy to have that focus specifically on what you're trying to build. When he was growing up, he said that he was called a freak, and of course that didn't feel great about it, so at points he did try and watch South Park to fit in, and he also tried and do what he could to see what he could do to build and kind of be liked by other people in his class. And he also built a business. He found that he's now found as he's built businesses that he's found other ludicrous people who now have a great life, and that's kind of something, as I alluded to in the beginning, that we've seen as a very strong commonality in anyone who is successful. It's their extensive focus on being able to focus on what they're doing and even when the results aren't there, continue to dig in, continue to focus on being able to do the work so that the results then can come. It becomes easier to find your tribe as we get older, and we look to do the same throughout our lives. Personally, for me, I'd rather have a few people who share the same values as me, and we don't necessarily have to have the same hobbies or ambitions, of course. However, it's easier if they do share the same values and do have the same ambitions. But I think when we're in school, and this is something that they did touch on twice in the podcast, was that there's a lot of people, and it is kind of difficult, and a lot of children can find it hard to not be in a box in that respect, and it's harder because you are, I guess, conformed within school to be in that box and be part of what's going on with that, being the traditional, being what's useful, and Jimmy definitely wasn't. And personally, as someone who was in that maybe could be described as a freak crowd when going through school, I can of course relate to that as well. And it seemed that Jimmy felt similar, and quote, if you have a younger viewer who's in the same spot, e.g. being bullied or in a level of an outcast, he wanted to say to them that you're not the problem, it's your environment, and you're not always going to be like this or be in that situation, and you've just got to put yourself in a better environment. Steven then moves on to ask Jimmy about his mother and father, and it seems that Jimmy doesn't really want to talk much about his father, as they do talk more about his mother, and he kind of, I guess you would say, pushes away the idea and really doesn't want to talk about his father when it is touched on a couple of times within the episode. Personally, I'm not sure if there is a link between not having a clear male role model or a father in someone, or someone to look to as a father figure, or a father, of course, in someone's past, and then having a great drive to move forward. But I know that sadly we live in a culture where, for many reasons that will be personal to each person, most sons don't have a father around when growing up, or I'm sure in some respects they would say they're better off without them around in some ways. I recalled having conversations with my own mother a few weeks ago that I personally believe that I've come out better just because of her own nurture and her own work with me as I was growing up than I would, to be honest, with my own father around. Of course, it's not necessarily the same case in every case, and it is nuanced, but of course, it is a common trait in entrepreneurs, or quote, successful business people. And I would be interested to hear the psychology, or hear your thoughts on the psychology, if you do feel that there is a link between, especially for us males, having a link between a lack of father figure and the drive to be successful in things like business or in career, I suppose. And just to share some statistics for those in the US, it's around 19.5 million children, more than 1 in 4 live without a father in the home, and across the UK 2.7 million children have no father figure at home, representing 1 in 5 of all children in the home as well are growing up without a father figure specifically. Jimmy then goes on to share a story of his family in 2008. Quote, we were over leveraged, so they literally went bankrupt, end quote. Sadly, Jimmy's mum needed to get 2 jobs trying to bring them up, and that of course created some challenges, with Jimmy also having Crohn's disease and his brother having some issues and challenges that he obviously didn't want to share because it's not his story to specifically go into. Jimmy didn't really care about school as a whole, and being as he wanted to just be a YouTuber, and of course created some friction between him and his mother when he was growing up. And there has been a lot of conversation, and whenever Jimmy has gone on podcasts, he's talked about the fact that he was hyper focused on YouTube and really obsessed with becoming a YouTuber as a whole. They then move on to share about when Jimmy started creating videos from the ages of 11, and he is rather honest, and he said it's the only thing he wanted to do. Steven then asked him, Jimmy, what about his father, making it clear that he didn't really want to talk about it, by saying, and quote, that's a topic for another day, clearly feeling uncomfortable. So they moved on in the podcast specifically. As I said, there's clearly some bad relationship there, and kind of implying that it wasn't necessarily a good relationship, and Jimmy does confirm that. Personally, the more I listen to Jimmy talk about his mother, he clearly cares a lot about her, and I think I can understand where she's coming from when it comes to when he was growing up, as Jimmy was rather risky when it came to not keeping money aside, and he needed to, when he was starting to make money, for example, even when he said on the podcast that him also saying on the podcast specifically, that he was way too obsessed with building the business and always went all in. To be honest, I think in the first 5 years or so, when I was personally building the Bartlett Media and building what I'm building here, I was also in the same position. Even he said on the podcast that he was playing very risky, so he would all in, and he continues to all in. So the example of making £100,000 or $100,000 to then put into the next video. And for the first 5 years of what I was doing with Bartlett Media, I would follow a very similar model in the respect to basically all in to move the business forward and try and create that exponential growth. But now personally, after last year, I've seen and I can understand where having a rainy day fund or having a set of money can actually create really strong personal foundations for you, but also allowing you to then actually say no to some of the wrong jobs, which actually will have a knock-on effect, because it allows you to then have opportunities to create this video, for example, where you have that extra time, you have the ability to say no to the wrong projects, and then you don't have to quote eat shit to be able to keep your bills paid, and then you can continue to add and build on the business rather than working in it. It's also funny how your goals and the things you want when you start out a business in a very optimistic mindset can tweak and change, as the sad reality of running a business in things as they get, quote, economically harder, end quote, it begins to be more and more personally feeling the larger your pot of money, the more powerful you can keep the brand alive for a long time. And of course, it does easily say, and it's easier said than done, as I've talked about in other content. Then they get into what drives Jimmy wanting to be a YouTuber in general, and he said in general he's very honest, and he of course loves it, but he was aware that YouTubers can make a lot of money, and he would be able to look after his family if he could make a lot of money. Personally, I've found the same thing, and so many people are focused on making money, but they may be looking to buy necessarily the wrong things. So they're more materialistic in the respect to they're looking to buy a bigger house and a bigger car, and of course those things, and it's down to who you are. Personally, I've found the more people I talk to about money, the reason why they're driven for creating it and getting it and obtaining it is because of the freedom and the security that money can give you, and it removes a whole amount of worry and stress about where that money's coming from to potentially pay bills. And Jimmy and Steven also do share a little bit more about it's not necessarily just one thing that motivates humans. In Jimmy's view, yes, he can see that it's power and he wants more money, but he also feels that the more money he makes, the more awareness he can then gain, which in turn means the more good he can then do in the world. He then personally explains some of the reasons that get him out of the bed in the morning is just he loves solving complex problems that are hard to fix, and I think that's what gets me out of bed. They then lead on to talking about the fact that Jimmy does have Crohn's disease, which for those who don't know, Crohn's disease is an illness where your immune system attacks itself, and Jimmy shares that when he was 15 that he would be needing to go to the bathroom 8 to 10 times a day because he couldn't digest food properly. Quote, his chi or digestive tract is attacking itself, and it's very weird. Your immune system in your gut thinks your gut is a foreign body and then starts attacking itself. He shared about a time where he lost 50 pounds, and then Jimmy goes into detail on how they then fixed it by giving him medication to stop his immune system from working, so it could essentially stop eating itself. However, this does mean he gets ill a lot. When Jimmy believes that he is living life on hard mode because there's so many days where he wakes up and doesn't have a huge amount of energy, yet still to get on with what his businesses and his YouTube channel require him to do. And that is a claim why he feels that he quotes needs to love what he does. He then talks about the fact that compounding that with being ill all the time and that can also then cause challenges as well, because of course if you're ill all the time, that's going to then create issues when you need to be filming and such. They both then move on to talk about the fact that Steven has recently been diagnosed with ADHD. Personally, as a dyslexic, I can share some of the similar traits to ADHD, and mostly jumping from one thing to the next and finding it hard to solely focus on one thing. However, personally, I've developed habits into my life that can really help with this, like writing and reading, to allow me to focus on one task for an extended period of time. Jimmy believes that you can see the sum of those people you spend the time with. So, for example, quote, he talks like them, he becomes interested in the same things they are, and he does believe that it's one of the reasons why he's successful as he is. And something that I've talked about personally within my own circles is the fact that this is really true, because if I had surrounded myself with people who were maybe not the best for me, or not success minded, or maybe went down the wrong path, then I would have and could have specifically gone down that wrong path as well. They then move on to talk about the fact that both of them focus on specific 1% improvements around the idea of building 1% to be better every single day, which will create a strong compounding effect. Personally, one of my favorite quotes I've been following for the last couple of years is, quote, if you have a 1% better every single day for 1 year, you'll end up 37 times better than the time you've in that time you've done. This is why focusing on small changes and small choices don't make much of a difference at times, but they add up over the long term. They then move on to share more about Jimmy's core ideas when he believes that anything is possible, and if you're willing to put the time and effort in. And Jimmy believes to go viral, you need to do something that hasn't been done before. And he wanted to share a story about a purple cow. He shares a story about how you can be driving down a road and see a cow, and let's be honest, no one cares, right? But what if the cow was purple? You'd be like, what the fuck? Why is the cow purple? You are then more likely to talk about it within your network and your friends. So Jimmy sees content a lot like this purple cow. So what kind of content or social media content can you create that's going to have the same reaction as that purple cow? Then they move on to talk about what Jimmy feels is the key traits when hiring new people, and when he is willing to invest a huge amount of time into helping someone grow, he needs them to become, quote, coachable. He's also questions and would like, of course, to receive a lot of dividends from that investment and that time in having A players on his team. So he wants to see, and he was talking specifically about it being the 8th wonder of the world, where people were in the position where he could invest in them, teach them systems, teach them how he thinks, etc. So then he's in a position where he can reap the rewards of having that member of staff for 10 years. And he has, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, has fired people from what he alluded to because they weren't necessarily thinking that way, or they weren't committing to the company in how it would be rewarded and seeing the value that they could provide to the company, which in turn then would be rewarded in the future. And he only wants, specifically, and this kind of leans into that, where he only wants people who are in love with what they do. And Jimmy personally thinks that the worst trait is mediocrity, or wanting to be average in that respect. Great people should just love working with great people, and Jimmy believes that A players being around other A players will bring out a part of him, when, however, working with C or B players starting to make them not want to work as much and not as much fun or not making work as fun. So a lot of the time we talk about that energy and that kind of focus that can come from creating that content overall, or creating those businesses, or working on those solutions and those problems. So he only wants to specifically work with A players because it allows him to have that separate energy, and he talked a lot about that as well. He feels that every business needs to be careful with those people who they do bring into the business, as they're not going to drag the overall culture down. But he does, of course, understand that it's not for everyone, but it can be, it's not everyone's meant to be and necessarily going to be as driven to be a world-ending monster. Jimmy then does go on to talk about the fact that one of the biggest reasons behind why people leave a job is not because of the amount of money that they're making, is because they don't necessarily enjoy the people they're working with. So one of the things he focuses on, and Steven also confirms this because he talks to a lot of founders, he talks to a lot of CEOs through his work on Dragon's Den, but also of course with the podcast, where a lot of entrepreneurs find HR the most challenging, but also the most, I guess you could say, taxing, or potentially irritation, or the amount of friction that could be caused by that, to be one of the main reasons why people do unfortunately leave a company, and why you need to focus on it if you are trying to build a unique and powerful culture to continue to grow your company. Jimmy wishes that he had more experience with building businesses, and he goes on to explain every time they say hit 100 staff in one time, this is the first time he's been there, so it does feel as if he's building the road as he walks it. But they both agree the only way that you can learn is by making mistakes and making them fast. And this is why sometimes that Jimmy is focused on finding and working with people who have already scaled businesses to this point, and doing everything he can to learn from them so he can grow faster. Steven then shares that he is specifically terrified of hiring people, because when it's clear to me that there's a huge investment and a huge incentive to for anyone that has worked with that person, so it would be Steven or Jimmy in this case, to say something bad about you in the press. So Steven then asks about how Jimmy has worked to deal with this problem, and Jimmy claims that he's a problem solver, and says that he feels that if there's something that has actually been done wrong, then he will look to fix it internally, and then or understand that if it's not an actual problem, it's just a rumor. I mean, that is what it is, and he believes that it just comes down to being part of the hiring and working with so many people. Jimmy that's gone into facts that due to the sheer number of people that watch their content, it's likely that even if 1% of the people who watch their videos dislike the video, that's still going to be 2 million people. So he personally focuses on to have this as an internal guideline to do I think it's good, or do I think I'm moving in the correct moral direction? And he does believe in what he is doing. He also, of course, understands that he's not going to be able to make everyone happy. They then, of course, share that our brains are not wired for this number of messages of hate that we can receive online. And within the show, Jimmy talks about the fact that he, quote, has likely read 5,000 or more messages from people telling him to kill himself. And he claims that there is, of course, points where he's putting every dollar he makes back into the content, where comments in the video are doing well, but there's also one comment that claims that he's lazy, and of course that gets to him. And one of the core reasons that keeps him moving forward is that he believes that a world where he helps people is more fun than a world where he doesn't. Jimmy has also personally found that the more he helps people, the more he is hated or disliked when it comes to seeing other creators or other influencers being selfish or being more materialistic. They're more liked online than, say, Jimmy is for helping and do good things, and because he's then putting good things out into the world. And he's found actually the response, because we're in an American culture, and I would say probably a British culture as well, that says that if you're doing good in the world, the only reason why you are doing that is because you're trying to shield from all of the horrible things you obviously must have done. So he could actually have less people shit on him, as he said it, than by doing less good in the world, but he thinks that's going to be a negative for the world as a whole. So he goes out of his way to ensure that he can still do those things, the philanthropy work he does. And just a couple of examples, he's built wells in Africa, he's building schools in Africa, he's looking at how can he support and support charities that obviously do really good work to help in the US with food shortages and those who are on lower incomes, etc. And he's constantly looking to do that, and he has a channel directly to that has not been immune to the controversy as a whole. But I think overall his objective is, he's not always going to get it necessarily right, but his objective is that he is looking to try and be a better source in the world, and especially when we get on later talking about his chocolate company and how he's looking to ethically source, which I know we've talked about before, but I will reiterate it because it was covered in the podcast. He is trying to be a net positive for the world. Steven then shares about some times when he has personally got shit on or got some bad feedback from some of the people he has interviewed, and he has always refocused on what his personal priorities are and principles are, because he has to anchor himself to them to be able to keep moving forward. I guess it comes back to understanding that you're not going to be able to make everyone happy, so focus on the inner understanding and the belief that you have that you're doing the right thing. The podcast then moves on to talking about workaholism. For those who don't know, I'll leave the meaning down below. It's a set of behaviors that need to be worked through that can that negatively impact on someone's personal health or relationships and creativity. When we go into talking about Jimmy's crazy level of filming in X place and then him constantly flying to next location, specifically he then shares the fact that they were filming that podcast at 1 a.m. In the morning Pacifically, where then he claims that he will not be home for the next 16 days because he's traveling around filming videos for the next 16 days. And then do talk about the fact that Jimmy has been working, and he shares that it can be hard because how much he has to travel for filming, and he's honest, whatever you make priority will get done, because he had to let his gym slip because of how much he's doing with Beast Games, how much he's doing with his businesses, but also how much he needed to push through that uncomfortability. And also it's having a knock-on effect to his sleep as well. So of course if he then does a really strong workout or really difficult workout, that's then going to have a knock-on effect to him being able to then sleep or needing more sleep. And if he is sleep deprived, then he's going to be lower on energy than he would like when it comes to filming. And then Steven then asks how Jimmy actually is, and Jimmy's answer specifically explains that a lot of his life and a lot of what he does, like everyone, he has ups and he has downs. I think that like many of us, he's away and things will change on a daily basis. For example, when they were filming the episode, the final Beast Games episode was just released specifically when they were filming it. So he was really happy that took place. And then as he became so busy, he found it harder because he also got the flu, he wasn't sleeping much, etc. So that was going to pull him down because he didn't have something to look forward to, right? Steven talks about the fact that it does lead on to the Olympic it's called Olympic depression by the sound of it, and it's basically the same could be true when it comes to boxers and then winning a world title belt, or an Olympian when they win their gold medal, because their thing that they had as their goal and their North Star ceases to exist because they've achieved it. So it's the question of their then trying to reevaluate or relook at what they're doing with their North Star and how that then has a knock-on effect, or after that high you have to then have a balance, and it comes back to after blues. Some people who are used to going on holidays will tell you in most cases you're going to have after holiday blues. It's the same principle. However, personally, I think it's also about focusing on having a high level of discipline, and specifically at the time of writing these notes specifically and filming, I have basically committed to this video being out as soon as possible. So I've written these notes and I spent most of the day doing that. You might not think that necessarily an hour and 40 minutes of podcast will take an entire day to write up a review on, but it does. They also then go on to share about what Jimmy feels about mental health as a whole, and he claims that, so here's the problem: if mental health was a priority for me, then I wouldn't be nearly as successful as I am. Being deeply uncomfortable for an extended period of time is one of the deepest modes. Jimmy claims that there is a reason why no one creates videos like me. Of course, not to the same level, but putting yourself into a place where you're uncomfortable. And I personally think that there's a key when you work for yourself, but also if you focus on looking on growth, you need to develop the ability to be able to push yourself consistently to what is comfortable, so then you can expand that comfort zone. So then the new area of your comfort zone is going to be then comfortable, that used to be uncomfortable, right? That's the only way you're going to be able to do it, and the only way you're going to be able to move things forward. And that's why I think Jimmy does focus. He didn't mention the word discipline, but I think that's why he focuses on discipline specifically, because everything he's doing is challenging, is difficult. I personally believe that nearly every fear that we have can be overcome if we personally believe that, and we're willing enough to push through the level of discomfort and to build enough evidence in our mind to allow us to understand that you're not necessarily going to die when you're doing X or Y. Jimmy then talks about the fact of how he's going to feel tomorrow after doing this podcast. Quote, "When I woke up tomorrow, I'm going to feel pretty tired and, to be honest, feel like shit. I'm going to go and have to do something, and I'm going to have to tell myself how you feel right now is why no one else wants what you want, or why they're going to be able to get to it." And then Jimmy does share and carry on about saying that that is his ultimate advantage, because he can push for those days, day after day after day, for years after years after years. Jimmy also has personally found that one of the only ways that he doesn't have a mental breakdown every week is by organizing his schedule in such a way where his natural state of mind is to obsess over a certain business. So he was talking a lot about the fact that he spends a lot of his time focusing on his chocolate company, and then the next week, for example, then focus on what's going on his studio and his production company to do what he's doing on YouTube, and so on. When there's a problem, he will schedule his time in such a way where he's not having to constantly flip between YouTube, chocolate business, software business, YouTube, so on, because that's exhausting. And it does remind me of a quote that Steven also shared on a different podcast when he interviewed Jimmy Carr. The quote, "Everyone is jealous of what you've got, but no one is jealous of how you got it," which shows that, this trait of everyone wants the massive revenue or massive business or massive channel or massive this or massive that, etc., but they're not willing to go through the work that it takes necessarily to get either good enough to be getting those things, or number two, just the sheer volume of hours and skill and work to build those skills to be able to have this incredible thing, whatever it is that you're looking to move forward or looking to idolize. It could be Jimmy Carr's career, or it could be what MrBeast is doing, or what Jimmy's doing there as well, or even what Steven Bartlett's got in that respect. They have all gone through that uncomfortability to push themselves to get to that point. And I think it says a lot about the average person that they want to live a comfortable life and but if you want to be the best in the world, as Jimmy said at the start of the interview, you need to do things and push past what the average person is willing to do. And if you have more than if you want more than the average person, you have to do more than the average person. And it comes down to what Jimmy said again, this is the price you have to pay. You should see this as a good thing. If you want all of the businesses and you want to be able to change the world, this is what it requires for an extended period of time. And then it goes into talk about the fact that one of the things that he'll never be able to outsource or get someone else to do is the fact that he has to be, and showing Jimmy in content and him being in front of the camera is the main job that he can do. So for example, for most of 2024 he spent a lot of his hours, or 25 days out of 30 on average a month, filming to keep the largest YouTube channel in the world going. But also he of course was having Beast Games and his chocolate company and his software brands as well, and he felt that it was a lot to rest on his shoulders, and he has employed a lot of people he really cares about, so his friends, his family, a lot of them work for him, so it's all down to him. Steven then moved to ask Jimmy if he'd ever thought about wanting to stop YouTube, and it came with the context of, say for example, we were seeing a lot of creators get to say 10 million subs and then just stopping because they were burnt out. Jimmy then talks about the fact that there's videos that he wants to quit all the time for a lot of reasons, but of course it never feels good, and it would hurt the opportunity cost so much. So because for example, he gave the example of him surviving on a desert island for 7 days, where there was some issues with him being heavily sunburned and getting bitten by a set of sand bugs specifically, and that cost him 2 days, so he had to quit because of health issues, because there was concern that he might get seriously hurt or worse in that respect as well. But the opportunity cost of that is he doesn't then have a video to upload, so that was his main concern. And it's about the risk of failing, or risk of failing a challenge specifically, is because a lot of what he does is obviously challenge content, or potentially dying in the process. So in answer to if he would ever stop YouTube full stop, he explained no, but a few breaks would have been nice now and again, so he could sleep 9 hours a day, for example, that whilst the Beast Games were going on, he hasn't been doing. The podcast then moves on to talk about Jimmy's love life, and he's personally shared his time with his now fiancée as frictionless. They both love learning, they both love playing the same video games, and they both love watching the same TV shows. And it's key that she understands that where Jimmy's work sits in his priorities and his life. And Jimmy shares that he believes that the key to him and his fiancée working is that she's intelligent and independent, but also she's willing to mold her life around mine, he said, in answer to the question where he said, well, how do you see each other? Because Jimmy is of course traveling a lot, he's constantly moving around for filming, etc. So he explains that a lot of the time they spend with one another is when they either go into an hour before they go into bed, an hour when they've just woken up, or when Jimmy's in transport to those filming locations, or when you have those small pockets of downtime on set. Of course, then the conversation flowed into if Jimmy then wanted children. His answer was yes, but he wanted to wait for as long as possible because his work schedule isn't compatible with him wanting to be a great dad. He shares that he would love to help, he loves and helps coach people, so of course that would be a perfect synergy with his wants to be a very present father. Steven then understands that from research done that Jimmy is now a quote big business owner rather than just a YouTuber or a creator, and they ended up talking about the fact that Jimmy sees money very differently to others, when most people see money to then go and then stop and chill out and relax and slow down and retire, when Jimmy sees money quote as a fuel to grow a business, and he all works to making the world a better place and allowing him to have a full fulfilled life, so that when he's 70 he will not live with regret. Steven then moves on to ask Jimmy if he thinks that he personally struggles with focus. He doesn't, but Jimmy doesn't think that he does, because he believes that he's found a really good groove with work at the moment and what he's doing with ethical sourcing the products that he's making. Jimmy is then asked to go into a little bit more detail on the ethical sourcing model that really matters to him, and he explains that nearly all of the world's cocoa comes from West Africa, where he is then, as he read up on it more, he found that 46% of labour in West Africa on cocoa farms is child labour, in that respect. So they're, because of the issues that he discusses with the and he goes into a bit more detail on the fact that his journey into talking to bigger suppliers about, is there a way that we can pay you more to ensure that the cocoa farms that we're getting our cocoa for Feastables from is going to be ethically sourced, e.g. not involving child labour? And the answer was, to be honest, not really. And he got really upset and really frustrated by the lack of want to change from the chocolate industry as a whole. So he said, fuck it, I'll fix it. And he's worked tirelessly in that respect to go into and try and fix that problem. And he's working with some ethical source businesses to be able to fix that infrastructure. And there is a video coming out next week where we talk about this in a bit more depth, so I'll leave that link down below if you're interested. He did ask Steven specifically about how many children he believed there was to, that were at cause of this, or where the issue was there specifically. And Jimmy said, I think Steven said around 5,000, and Jimmy answered said it's 1.5 million children in child labour in West Africa just on cocoa farms. So this is where Jimmy is hoping, as the brand becomes bigger and bigger, and he can make more money through the chocolate business, and making sure that it's also ethically, profitably sourced, so it's ethical in respect to how he sources it, but then it's also a profitable company. He can then hopefully make change in the overarching chocolate industry, because the question and the issue or the concern at the moment is Jimmy isn't necessarily at the scale, and the argument from other large chocolate providers could be that Jimmy's not of a scale where you have to source things questionably ethically because of the scale that these other chocolate companies are using it in that respect as well. So he wants to get to the point where he is profitable and scalable at their scale, so then he can potentially either educate those who want to, or at minimum at least be an awkward show point for them to say, well, I've done it, so it's very obvious that it is. You then are just choosing not to do it specifically. Steven then asked if he would ever sell his YouTube channel or his chocolate business, and his answer would be, what was the point? Because I would just use the money to start another YouTube channel, and if he was going to sell the chocolate business, the first thing someone else would do would be cut the cost of being able to up the profit margin, so again, he wouldn't. They then go into detail on some of the updates that Jimmy wants to make to the wrapping as a whole of the chocolate bar, his Feastables brand, and then also a handful of little obsessions over the details. For example, the fact that Jimmy's bars are getting broken and they're trying to fix it. And then he shares a story where he had a layover and he went to 30 Walmart stores to check on the details of his chocolate for the store, for example, to making sure that no broken bars were being sold, because this affects the way the customer feels about how it's feeling when they buy it. And Steven pointed out that Jimmy has so many things going on, with X million followers here, X number of videos there, a TV show there, yet he still makes the time to go to 30 stores to make these specific things, because he really does seem to care about that chocolate brand and what he's doing. So never mind how it's sourced, but also how the consumer and the customer that's going to buy that chocolate is actually how that process is. So when they open it, is it a bar that's not broken? Are things well organized in that respect as well? So he really does seem to care about his customer in that respect as well. That will be probably to do with and true to why he's so successful in that respect as well. Then they move on to talk about if Jimmy gets worried about views on YouTube, and Jimmy claims that his viewers, the views have only gone up in 14 years. And I'm sure many people would think that he looks at the stats as a video goes live. He doesn't. They then talk about the fact of what Jimmy does do, though, because he does pay to have a report be curated and see how each video is doing. And however, it sounds as if he's always okay if a video doesn't do well, as long as those involved are able to learn from what went wrong. but a lot of Jimmy's success has come from him testing over and over and over again. So this means he's going to fail, and he's going to have some videos that don't do well because he's trying new things every week. Jimmy did talk about the fact that he wants a culture where people feel comfortable to experiment and trying and will feel fine if they fail. Steven and Jimmy then go on to talk about Beast Games specifically. Steven then focuses on something that Jimmy said on stage when talking about the fact that he felt sad due to the fact that it was done and over, and he likened it to the Olympic depression that we alluded to a little bit earlier in this episode, where they lose their North Star because they've already got the gold or etc. Jimmy then explains why creating every moment within the games and some of the challenges they of course ran into for the number of hours of files and the bits of footage, but he did share the reasonings behind why he felt he needed to do that and record every minute so it would feel real, so that it wasn't necessarily a story producer going and saying what the contestant should say into camera and really kind of creating that. And you can see that in some TV shows where they're in a position where you can sort of feel like something's off, and I think it's, we've been watching, personally outside of work, I've been watching some Bear Grylls stuff recently, and one of the things that they're doing is like miraculously his rope is not longer tied to the tree, and like there's like some quite obvious cuts and stuff, and that takes your immersion out of what's happening. And it's clearly TV magic, but there should be ways and there should be consistencies that are watched and looked at, because it will take the viewer out of that story that they're being told specifically. We also heard that Jimmy is tens of millions of out of pocket, and yes, that it was not a good financial decision to make Beast Games. I lost a lot of money, and I would have more money if I didn't film it. His goal for Series 1 was to make it the best it possibly could, not to make money. He believed that he couldn't let the YouTube community down, because YouTube creators or YouTubers have not had a good rep on when it comes to doing stuff with streaming platforms. And Jimmy knows specifically that hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars are going to flow into creators' pockets because of Beast Games. With Jimmy then going on to say that the show is very evergreen, and the show has been seen by over 700,000 people that are new unique viewers every single day, so it's likely to breach and hit a bunch of records. But he was cautious because he didn't want to release anything before Amazon had put out a press release that we expect will be shortly, if it hasn't already been done so. Steven then showed Jimmy some images of when he was a lot younger and asked if you could talk to that little boy in these images, what would you say to him? Jimmy answered by Bitcoin, and he didn't think he would actually say anything, to be honest, because what he didn't want to do was trigger what could be called or could be known as a butterfly effect. For those who don't know, the butterfly effect is a small idea, seemingly trivial event may result in different outcomes in specific, may have large consequences, where Jimmy wouldn't have wanted to change anything that has happened because it has allowed him to be where he is today. There is then, of course, they moved on to talk about if Jimmy could share anything to his mother again in that time. And again, he didn't really know what to say, because he really was clear that she did an amazing job, and she, quote, gave me all the tools that he needed, end quote. I personally think that there is a lot that can be said, and a lot that I think a lot of people want to change what has happened to them specifically. And I remember having a conversation a couple of years ago with a good friend of mine about this, and it was in the position where she was like, would you change your history, or would you change your concern, or would you change the fact you were dyslexic? And my answer has always been no, because it's the reason, and everything that's happened to me has allowed me to get to this point today, and allowed me to be the person that I am today, and Jimmy seemed to agree with that or say that. And there was kind of a shared moment in the podcast between Steven and Jimmy where their greatest fear is the day their mothers sadly pass away, because they obviously hold them very dear, as everyone I'm sure does, unless unfortunately you have a bad relationship with your mother. And it does seem like me that Jimmy is really close to his mother, and he wants her to, quote, make it to ensure that she can have that time with her grandkids when he does get around to specifically having them. And also, Steven then asked Jimmy the question that was left by the last guest, as the tradition has always been on the Diary of the CEO. If you were to die with a sound mind or sound body, which would you choose? And Jimmy chose the mind rather than body. Steven wanted to end the podcast by thanking Jimmy for showing what's possible, and it's okay to live by not fitting in a box as a young adult, that many may want to learn from this, and or what they already have learned as well. So that did wrap up that conversation, and then Jimmy was of course asked to sign or write a question for the next person that will come on Steven Bartlett's podcast. So that is our review, that is what we learned, that is what happened in that respect, and that is our thoughts and the kind of add value that we could do in that respect. So thank you ever so much for coming back and joining me. If you did enjoy this video and you would like to see more like it, more podcast reviews, more breakdowns, more news, more, how could you use social media to build your business, then feel free to subscribe. Thank you ever so much for coming back and joining me, and I'll see you very, very soon.